In the summer of 1918, 5 U.S. Naval railway guns made the journey across the Atlantic Ocean for use in France during the First World War. Although they were assigned to the 1st Army's Railway Artillery Reserve, the guns operated as independent units under the command of Rear Admiral Charles P. Plunkett. In early September 1918, Battery No. 2 went into action with the bombardment of a German-occupied railroad hub more than 20 miles away. The Historical Heritage Command Director Samuel Cox will now share some additional history of the Navy railway guns as we commemorate their 100-year anniversary. Director.
Good morning, Admiral Small. Thank you for taking time to be here today. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a lot better day than I thought it was going to be, but we picked the shady spot rather than the better visibility of the gun because we're humane about this. You know, whenever I get together with some of my fellow admirals, I like to jerk their chain a little bit and say, hey, what's the big deal about the rail gun? So I already got one here in our park here. The reality is the rail gun they're talking about nowadays is an electromagnetic rail gun, where this was a standard 14-inch 50 caliber naval rifle. But the thing that's important about this weapon system, I think, is its extraordinary example of innovation, rapid prototyping, and rapid acquisition of a weapon system designed to meet a specific requirement as a result of warfighting. That was done in only a couple months, to be honest, and is an example of something we could all aspire to today in how we could bring weapon systems online. I don't think we'll ever be able to match it again, but it was pretty important. The railgun was a response to German railroad artillery that outranged anything the Allies had during World War I. And there were a number of attempts in a number of countries to try to develop a system to counter what the Germans had. And it turned out it was the U.S. Navy that was able to provide a quick solution by using guns that were normally intended for battleships, the 14-inch guns. And because the newest U.S. battleships were now carrying 16-inch guns, there were actually a number of the 14-inch guns that were spare. And so the initial design for this weapon was started at the very end of December in 1917. And within 1 month, the design was completed. Construction commenced in mid-February, and the guns were done and ready to ship by mid-April, which is actually an extraordinarily fast time in order to put something together like that. The amount of time it took between April and the guns shooting in September, most of that was due to the uncertainty resulting from the massive German offensive that took place in the spring of 1918 and nearly overran Paris. And there was great uncertainty as to where would be the safest place to bring the guns ashore, where they could be the most effective. But by the middle of August, they were ashore. The Army General Pershing for the U.S. Army wanted to get them in action as quickly as possible. And on the 6th of September, the first gun of 5 that were sent over there, the gun under the command of Lieutenant J.G. Duckett, fired the first round at a range of over 20 miles against German positions. Interesting note is that when the gun first fired the round, the position that it was located in was actually the exact same position where on the 11th of November 1918, on the day that ended the war, the railway car where the Germans actually signed the armistice was in the same position where the U.S. railroad gun fired the first shot. Due to the fact that these were put together in a hurry, there were some issues with how they were able to operate. The gun itself could only traverse about 2.5 degrees in either direction. So in order to aim at the target, you had to build a railroad spur that would point the gun in the right direction. They also, because of the way the gun elevated, they then had to dig a 9-foot hole underneath the railway bed so that the breech could lower down low enough. And the breech was too big for the gauge of French railways, so the actual railroads had to be lifted up and moved. But it still was worked very effectively. There was a Mod 2 designed that corrected these issues, but none of them were ready by the end of the war. The last round fired by one of these guns was from battery number 4, and it was fired at 10:57:30 on the 11th of November, timed so that the round would impact a couple seconds before the armistice was to take place and the ceasefire was to take place at 1100 on the 11th of November 1918. These guns were subject to aerial reconnaissance and counter battery fire. Fortunately for us, only one U.S. sailor that was part of the crew of these batteries was killed during the war. Their manning was 25 officers and about 500 enlisted men under the overall command of Rear Admiral Plunkett. But the key point of the U.S. Navy's participation in the war was, although we only lost about 430 sailors during the entire course of the war, what we were able to do was to get 2 million U.S. Army troops to France a lot faster than the Germans ever thought was possible. And it was that infusion of that many troops that caused the Germans to do the math and go, we can't win this thing. And a result of what the U.S. Navy was able to do in getting those troops there without any losses to U-boats ended a war that at that point was the bloodiest in human history, resulting in millions of lives lost on both sides. The U.S. Army lost about 116,000 soldiers, 53,000 due to combat in a relatively short period of time. So in terms of the amount of time that the war lasted for the U.S., it was in fact the bloodiest in U.S. history. And the other casualties were a result of the Spanish flu epidemic that wiped out even more people around the world than the war did in the late 1918. So given that it's hot, I'll shut up. I thank you for coming out and recognizing the 100th anniversary of a significant development in the technology of the United States Navy. And please have a great rest of the day. Thank you very much for being here today.